I had been working at a small grocery store for several years. This story is about the creepiest thing that ever happened to me while I was working there. The store was open 24/7. That was mainly to give us a chance to clean the floors and stock the shelves for the daytime. But we were also open to the handful of customers who trickled in throughout the late hours. My shift was from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., so I was there all night. Mainly I would stock shelves for the next day, but I also had to work the cash whenever a customer would come in. Since it was the overnight shift, there were not many customers. The night manager was also there, but he would usually just sleep in the back office most of the time. There was a small couch back there, and he would make good use of it for the majority of the night shift. So I was basically alone for most of the time. It was about 2:30 a.m., and the store was empty, which was typical for this time of night. I was slowly stocking and organizing some shelves near the front when a tone rang throughout the store and the automatic door slid open. A man walked in. He was about 35 years old and wore a white dress shirt with black pants. Almost like it belonged to a tuxedo, but he was missing the jacket. That was an unusual look for this hour. Most of the late night customers are truck drivers, security guards, or other types of night shift workers. So seeing someone dressed like that was unusual. I turned to him and said hi. He just looked forward and kept walking, not even acknowledging me. That was rude, I thought, but I went back to my work, and he disappeared down one of the aisles. I knew that I would eventually need to help him at the cash register, so I kept an eye on the till at the front of the store so I could check him out when he was ready. After about 10 minutes, I started to get suspicious, but I didn't want to be a bother, so I kept working. As time went on, I became more concerned. It had been at least 20 or 30 minutes now, and I was pretty sure that something was wrong, because it rarely takes anyone that long to find what they're looking for. After I finished putting away the last of the items on my cart, I started walking up and down the narrow aisles of the store. I made my way halfway through the store and still didn't see any sign of that guy. As I continued, a cold chill ran down my spine. The store was dead silent. I would have thought that the man would be at least making some noise. I continued checking each aisle, one by one, but the man was nowhere to be found. When I made my way to the last aisle, I was very creeped out. I took a deep, long breath before poking my head around the corner. My heart was racing. As I feared, the last aisle was empty. The guy was gone, and I had no idea where he was. If he had gone out the front, then I would have heard the tone that door makes, and there was no way out the back without setting off the fire alarm. I bolted into the office to get the manager. When I burst into the room, he was asleep on the couch as usual. I blurted out my story, and he looked at me like I was crazy. He managed to calm me down after a few minutes. By then, I convinced him to check the security footage with me. There were of course a few cameras throughout the store that were always on. We sat at his desk and checked the time when the man had walked in. Sure enough, we saw a well-dressed man enter the store, just as I'd described. We followed him as he walked through the store, changing cameras as we needed. Our faces turned pale when we watched him walk to the back of the store and open the door to the office where we were sitting. We looked at each other for several seconds, then I glanced over to the small couch in the room and could just barely see a black dress shoe sticking out from underneath. The man was there, hiding under the couch. The two of us sprung up from our seats and sprinted out of the store to the street. The manager called the police, and they arrived within 5 minutes or so. They arrested the guy and took him out in handcuffs. To this day, we never found out why that guy was hiding under the couch. It still creeps me out to think of what he would have done if we didn't notice him when we did. This happened last week on a Tuesday afternoon. I work unusual hours, so my days off are on random days of the week. This has its benefits because I get to do my grocery shopping and other errands on weekdays when most people are at work or school. So when I go to the store, it's usually not very busy. I went grocery shopping and the store was almost empty. I would guess that there were less than 10 people in the entire place. I spent 15 or 20 minutes picking up all the things that I needed for the week. I usually only get one day off per week, so I stock up whenever I go shopping. After I was done, I walked over to one of the cash registers. There was a whole row of them, but only 2 were open, since it wasn't busy. I approached the till and started placing my items in front of the cashier. That's when I felt a presence behind me. I turned around and saw a middle-aged man, probably 40 years old. He wore a dirty t-shirt and a green baseball hat with a scruffy beard. I looked at him in surprise because the other register was free, so he had no reason to line up behind me. I turned around and tried to ignore him, continuing to unload my cart. That was when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around again, and the man was still there. This time he leaned in towards me and offered to pay for my groceries, then gave me a sly smile. My cart was pretty full, and I figured that I had at least $100 worth of stuff there, so I was not comfortable taking a favor like that from a complete stranger. I tried to be polite, but refused his offer. I also made sure to insert some kind of comment about my husband, even though I was and am single. I thought that might deter him. When I said that, the man's smile changed to a frown, and he walked away. I was relieved at first, and I continued paying for my stuff, then I left the store. I was still creeped out while walking to my car, and I felt like I was being watched. Despite that, I got into my car and drove away. There were a few more stops that I needed to make on my way home. I had planned to visit my bank, so I drove there and parked my car. Then I walked in and stood in line. There were 2 or 3 people in front of me while I was waiting. Someone else lined up behind me. I turned around, and it was the same guy from the grocery store. He must have followed me. I quickly turned around, pretending not to see him, but he instantly began trying to start a conversation with me. I tried my best to shut him down at every turn. I didn't want to be too aggressive and risk causing a scene. Eventually, it was my turn with the teller, and after I was finished with my business, I walked out of the bank. I cautiously looked over my shoulder as I stepped onto the sidewalk, and when I looked back, I could see that the man was following me. My fight or flight response kicked in, and I bolted to my car, not looking back. I knew I needed to get out of there before the guy had a chance to get to his car and follow me again. When I finally got there, I frantically started my engine and drove away. When I turned out of the parking lot, I saw the man, and he seemed to be yelling something at me, although I couldn't hear him. I still have no idea what that guy wanted with me, or what he would have done if he caught me. This happened last year. I was hanging out with my friends on a Friday night. There were 4 of us over at my friend Dave's place. We were mostly just talking and playing some games. After a while, someone suggested that we go get some snacks, since Dave didn't really have anything. Since I drove there that night, I offered to go to the grocery store and pick up some stuff. The store was only about a 15-minute drive away, so it wasn't a big deal for me to make the trip over there. I got into my car and headed over. It was about 10:30 p.m., and the large parking lot in front of the store was basically empty. I parked in a spot, a few rows from the front, right next to a large light post. I walked into the store, and when I did, I noticed that there was nobody there. There wasn't even a single employee that I could see. It was a big store though, and since it was late, I figured that the employees must just be in a different section. I grabbed some chips, a frozen pizza, and a box of ice cream bars, which was everything that the guys wanted. Then I headed up to the till at the front of the store. This store had those self-checkout machines, so I went to the closest one and paid for my stuff. While I was there, I saw a man standing outside through the large window next to me. He looked to be about 35 and had a black jacket with a gray hoodie underneath. He was just out there by himself, looking at me with an unsettling smile. Perhaps the creepiest part was that he was the only other person I'd seen since I got to the store. I felt very alone, and I was starting to get nervous about going outside. When I was finished paying, I looked up and the guy was gone. Feeling relieved, I walked out the large sliding door at the front of the store and headed back to my car. That's when I saw that the same guy was standing next to my car. He wasn't touching it or anything, but he was probably 2 or 3 feet away from my passenger side door. Like I said earlier, the parking lot was almost empty, so it was very strange that he decided to stand right there. He was holding a large bottle of Coke, which was almost empty. He took the last gulp as I was walking towards my car. As I got closer, I tried to pretend that I wasn't nervous, and when I approached, the man looked at me and smiled. I greeted him as politely as I could, saying something like, "Have a good night," I think. "You too," he replied. Then I simply got into my car and drove away. The man stared at me as I did. I felt relieved and just a little embarrassed that I had been so worried. It seemed in that moment that the man was just a friendly guy hanging around the store. Definitely a strange guy, but harmless, I thought. After a few minutes, my car stalled out of nowhere. I had about a quarter of a tank at the time, so it was very confusing. It was actually my father's car, and it was a 2-year-old Toyota, so it's incredibly rare for things like this to just randomly go wrong. I managed to drift over to the side of the street with my remaining momentum. Then I put the car in park and sat there for a few seconds in bewilderment. Not more than 2 minutes later, a car pulled up next to me and stopped. The window rolled down and a man stuck his head out. It was the same guy from the parking lot who was standing next to my car before. He smiled at me. "Hey man, you stuck?" he asked me. "No, it's okay, I'm fine," I stumbled. "I can give you a ride if you want," the guy offered. Obviously, I refused, and I told him that my dad was already on the way. When I said that, he rolled up his window and drove off. In reality, my dad was out of town on business at the time, but I made up the lie to scare him away. My next move was to call AAA. When the technician arrived, I told him what happened, that my car just stalled out of nowhere. He popped the hood so he could take a look. He immediately called me over to the front of my car. He was holding some part in his hand. I don't know much about cars, so I didn't know what it was until he explained it to me. It was the fuel filter, and he told me it was filled with something, like Coke or Pepsi. When he told me that, everything made sense. That creepy guy from the store filled my tank with Coke, then followed me, waiting for my car to break down. I still have no idea what would have happened if I got into his car, but I'm glad things never got to that point.